Afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this virtual event. Very happy to have everybody here. My name is Dario. I'm the director of the Military and Veterans Center on campus, which is dedicated space for the last 10 years that provides outstanding support and services to TU student veterans and their family members. I'm going to go ahead and begin, introduce you to, and please welcome our first presenter, Rex Rehfeld. Rex is an Osher Lifelong Learning at TU instructor, and along with him, we have Felicity, who is in the TU Archives Associate, but I'll introduce her as well. Rex, thank you for being with us here today. That's your cue to take over, friend. Also, if you have any questions, Rex has asked that you drop them in the chat, and I will convey them to him.
Okay, here we go. First, let's share the screen. Okay, good afternoon. As you all know, because that's why we're here today, Wednesday, November 11th is Veterans Day, a federal holiday inaugurated in 1954 to honor this nation's armed forces veterans. Excuse me, there we go. My name is Rex Rehfeld. I served in the Navy during There we go. I served in the Navy during World War II and then in the Army during the Korean War. Hold on one second. Oh, it doesn't matter. Okay. Now, Veterans Day, how did it come about? On November 11th, an armistice agreement between the Germans and Western allies was signed, ending hostilities on the Western Front and considered by the Allied powers the end of the war. And 1 year later, Woodrow Wilson, our president, issued a memo commemorating the first anniversary, saying, "To us, the reflections of Armistice Day will be filled with solemn pride in the heroism of those who died in this country's service, and with gratitude for the victory, both because of the thing from which it has freed us and because of the opportunity it has given America to show her sympathy with peace and justice in the councils of nations." In 1926, Congress requested that then President Calvin Coolidge issue a proclamation calling for the annual observance of November 11th with appropriate ceremonies. By then, 27 states had already declared the state a legal holiday. Communities celebrated the day with parades and other ceremonies. And finally, on May 19th, 1938, Congress made the day a day to be dedicated to the cause of world peace and to be thereafter celebrated and known as Armistice Day. Then after two more wars, in 1954, the day was changed to Veterans Day. So here we are today to honor not just those who served, and as you can see, not just those who are serving or served recently, but those who have answered what used to be known as a call to colors, as reflected in this poster with the uniforms worn in all our wars. Armistice Day was meant to honor those who served during World War I. Veterans Day is a day that honors all who have served and those who are currently serving. We've had a lot of wars, so over the years there have been a lot of veterans, and we're losing them daily, even as we create a few more. In 2010, there were about 22 million veterans from World War II and the wars that followed. In 2018, that had dropped to a little over 18 million. And every day we lose many of those who served in World War II and Korea, as well as the other wars. Of the over 16 million men and women who served during World War II, less than 500,000 are around today, and the youngest would now be 91. For Korea, of the almost 6 million that served, only a little more than 2 million are alive today, and the youngest would be 83. Now let's talk about the men and women themselves. We don't need to talk much about the men. They've been shot at ever since time immemorial. But what about the women? Women have been involved in most of our wars. During the Revolutionary War, women followed their husbands to camp out of necessity. Many served in military camps as laundresses, cooks, nurses, but only with the permission from the commanding officers. And there were instances in which a few women actually served as soldiers, not always disguised as men. During the War of 1812, 2 women served as nurses for several months aboard the USS United States at the request of Commodore Stephen Decatur. During the Civil War, women served as administrators of hospitals as well as nurses and cooks in battlefield hospitals. Women also served as spies, and some disguised as men served as soldiers. And during the Spanish-American War, 1,500 civilian women served as nurses assigned to Army hospitals in the United States. Hundreds more served as support staff, spies, and again, a few even disguised themselves as men to serve in the military. Now, until 1901, these arrangements were ad hoc. Then in 1901, the Army Nurse Corps was established, followed by the Navy Nurse Corps in 1908. Though uniforms for both services were adopted at some time before 1914, Army and Navy nurses were civilian employees with few benefits. They lacked ranks, were not eligible for retirement or disability pensions. At some later date, though still not actually members of the armed services, nurses were allowed officer-relevant ranks and insignia in order that enlisted personnel would obey them. During World War I, 33,000 women served as nurses and support staff officially in the military, and more than 400 nurses died in the line of duty. And for the first time, women were served as other than nurses. In 1917, Loretta Perfectus Walsh became the first American active duty Navy woman, the first woman allowed to serve as a woman in any of the United States Armed Forces as anything other than a nurse, when she became the first woman petty officer and served in clerical positions. Walsh was the first of the World War I yeoman females, commonly called yeomanettes, entitled to receive the same benefits and responsibility, and with the same responsibilities as men, including identical pay. Women also served in the Marine Corps and Navy. Over 13,000 served in the Navy and Marine Corps during the war. In July 1919, all were released from active duty. Some continued as members of the inactive Naval Reserve, and all were recognized as veterans and entitled to whatever benefits existed at the time or might be accorded later. But some who served were not recognized as veterans. With the invention of the telephone, a new technology became available for battlefield communication. Used earlier by the British in campaigns in India and in South Africa, during the Boer War, millions of miles of telephone wire were laid by both sides during World War I. In the early 1900s in the United States, women were preferred over men as switchboard operators. Over 80% of switchboard operators were women. And in 1902, the Census Bureau reported, "It has been demonstrated beyond all doubt that the work of operating is better handled by women than by men or boys." But the Army had no interest in the idea of women soldiers, and at first even resisted demands by camp commanders for the hiring of women's switchboards, but within a few months of our entry into the war, gave in to the inevitable. But these women were hired as civilian contractors, had no military privileges, wore civilian clothes, and were paid wages based on the local scales for telephone operators. But in France, it was a problem. Pershing staff was frustrated by the poor equipment and language barriers of the French telephone systems and found that they had few soldiers, if any, who could handle the system and were bilingual. So on November 8, 1917, General Pershing, the commanding general of American Expeditionary Force in France, cabled Washington, on account of the great difficulty of obtaining properly qualified men, request organization and dispatch to France a force of women telephone operators, all speaking French and English equally well. 450 were recruited, and they became known as the Hello Girls. They took the soldier's oath, they wore a uniform with appropriate insignia, but when the war ended, they were refused recognition as members of the Army because by statute, the Army was male. They did not receive recognition until 1978, when Congress approved veteran status and honorable discharge for the remaining Hello Girls. And of course, there were very few, if any. 1978, over 100, almost, well, as far as it was, a long time after World War I. A new book was published about them in 2017. Jumping forward, during World War II, more than 400,000 women served at home and abroad as mechanics, ambulance drivers, pilots, administrators, nurses, and in other non-combat roles. The Army established the Women's Auxiliary Army, the Women's Army Auxiliary Corps in 1942, which was changed to the Women's Army Corps in 1943. Over 150,000 women served as WACs during World War II. At the same time, the U.S. Naval Reserve, Women's Reserve, better known as the WAVES, for women accepted for voluntary emergency service, was established. The Marine Corps finally followed in early 1943. But there were others who did not initially receive recognition. One such group was the Women's Air Force Service Pilots, known as the WASPs, formed in August 1943 by the merger of the Women's Flying Training Detachment and the Women's Auxiliary Faring Squadron. During the period of operation, these women flew over 60 million miles. They transported every type of military aircraft. They towed targets for live anti-aircraft gun practice. They simulated strafing missions and transported cargo. However, they had no military standing. 38 WASP members lost their lives and one disappeared while on a ferry mission. They finally received recognition in 1977. In 1948, Congress passed the Women's Armed Service Integration Act, granting women permanent status in the military, subject to military authority and regulations, and entitled to women's benefits. And in 1976, women were admitted to the service academies. Women are now allowed to fly combat missions, serve on and as commanders of combat ships. During the Persian Gulf Wars, more than 41,000 women were deployed to combat zones and flew combat missions. Another group that was treated unfairly were African Americans. During the Revolutionary War, African Americans were initially banned from the Continental Army, but then desperation at Valley Forge forced Washington to lift the ban. But as shortages of manpower became apparent, they were grudgingly enrolled, largely for menial work rather than combat duty, and denied positions that might give them authority over white servicemen. With the passage of time, the consumption of cannon fodder would grant some the right to bleed for the country. And when the shooting was over, and the number of men under arms sharply reduced, they were the first to be dismissed. During the Civil War, African Americans were formed. The service of one, the 54th Massachusetts Regiment, was memorialized in the 1989 movie Glory. In 1866, 4 African American regiments, 2 cavalry and 2 infantry were created, all of which would be commanded by white officers. The regiments became known as the Buffalo Soldiers, probably because of their use of buffalo hide overcoats worn in the cold. During the Indian Wars, those which occurred 1865 to 1890, 16 African Americans won the Medal of Honor. In Cuba in 1898, all 4 of the African American regiments fought with distinction, including participating with the Rough Riders in the attack on Kettle and San Juan Hills. During World War I, even though General Pershing insisted that American units would fight as an army under his command and not be parceled out to the French and British, he made an exception. He gave the African American regiments to the French. And here they see, I think they're wearing their French helmets. I think their uniforms are ours. Segregation continued during World War II. Several African American artillery units and a tank battalion served in France and the 92nd Infantry Division in Italy. But in the Pacific, Marine and Navy African American were used mostly in ammunition and supply units. Among the most notable actions during World War II was the establishment of the All-American 99th Pursuit Squadron at the new Tuskegee Army Airfield. The Tuskegee Flyers had to fight to finally be assigned combat missions in Italy, primarily escorting bombers. Their aircraft's nose and tails were painted red, giving them the nickname the Red Tails. Legend has it that they never lost a bomber. Perhaps recognizing the rising civil rights movement, in July 1948, Truman issued an executive order that ordered integration of the services. Many have interpreted this order as desegregating the service, but it did not. It only allowed African Americans to be assigned to any unit rather than just to those that were segregated. But those units, notably the 24th Infantry Regiment, continued to be segregated. Only its regimental and its battalion commanders and most staff officers were white. Company grade officers, that is the company commanders and platoon leaders, were African American. But on May 12, 1951, General Ridgway, the Far East commander, requested that he be given authority to abolish all Black units in the Far East Command. He received approval that fall, and shortly afterwards, the entire United States Army adopted this long overdue reform, as did the other services. A group that many do not think of when discussing veterans are those in the Merchant Marine who served on the convoys during World War II. And what have veterans received in appreciation, reward, or compensation for their services? Until 1818, when Congress, passed pension legislation for indigent veterans, there had been no benefit programs. This was followed by providing service pensions for all veterans in 1832. Civil War and Spanish-American War veterans received pension benefits of some degree. For veterans of World War I, pensions were initially provided for only, there we go, with those connected with those with war-connected disabilities. But veterans organizations began demanding some sort of bonus payments to all who had served to make up for the disparity during the war years between the income of soldiers and those who did not serve. Moved by their pressure, in May 1924, Congress passed the World War Adjusted Compensation Act, commonly referred to as the Bonus Act. The act provided for the issuance of a certificate which provided for the payment of a bonus of up to $625 payable with interest in 1945. That's approximately $9,000 today. Then came World War II with the most comprehensive veterans benefit package ever provided. Concerned that 13 million men and women would suddenly enter the ranks of the unemployed as the country returned to peace, on June 22, 1944, President Franklin D. Roosevelt signed the Servicemen's Readjustment Act, commonly known as the GI Bill. The act offered federal aids to help veterans adjust to civilian life, with programs offering lower interest rates on home mortgages and loans to purchase businesses. But perhaps the most far-reaching provision was that making possible college and advanced education. The program provided free tuition, subsistence, books and supplies, and counseling services for veterans to continue their education. Within the following 7 years, approximately 9 million veterans received educational benefits. Veterans of subsequent wars have received similar benefits, though perhaps not as extensive. Instrumental in gaining benefits for veterans over the years have been the veterans organizations. The earliest was the Grand Army of the Republic, an organization of Union Army veterans formed on April 6, 1866. The GAR was dissolved in 1956 upon the death of its last member. The Veterans of Foreign Wars was formed in 1899, membership limited to those who actually fought on foreign soil. On March 15th, the American Legion was founded in Paris by members of the American Expeditionary Forces, the AEF, with membership open to any honorably discharged veteran. And on September 25th, 1920, the third largest disabled American veterans was founded. There have been those who have argued that military service is beneficial to the individual. During World War II, both secretaries of the Army and Navy recommended that a year of compulsory military service was necessary to maintain adequate forces in reserve in the future. They contended that a year of military training for all young men in their late teens would raise the standards of education, health, civic responsibility, and personal integrity of the nation's youth. But there was a lot of opposition. Said Henry Riston, president of Brown University, the only military necessity justifies compulsory military training. There's nothing in the history of a free people to support the idea that that kind of regimentation produces good, moral, intellectual, or civic results. But I think that many parents who supported the idea were those that would have been glad to get the teenagers out of the house. But I think the remarks of Timothy Schaefer, a Navy veteran who wrote in the Baltimore Sun, makes the case against peacetime compulsory service. He said, "Don't encourage anyone to join unless you've served. You cannot understand the challenges military members face until you have faced those exact same challenges. The time away from family members, deployments, long and erratic hours. Oh, and you might die." I love the part about the work hours. The work hours are 24/7. And for those who have been in combat, there is post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD. There's nothing new about PTSD. It was first identified as a condition of combat in 490 BCE, when at the Battle of Marathon, a Greek soldier went blind when the man next to him was killed. Unlike other disabilities for which there is a site of the wound or injury, along with pain, immobility, or impairments, it's obvious. But for many, if not most, there may be few indications of PTSD until behavior makes it apparent. And unfortunately, there is still stigma involved. There have been many complaints from men and women returning from Iraq and Afghanistan in obvious need of help, yet being ignored or in effect punished. In Berlin is a memorial to war dead. It's a very stark granite building, inside of which is just a single statue, the German artist Katie Kollwitz-Pieta, which she created in memory of her son, whom she had encouraged to go to war in 1914. He was dead by the end of the war. To me, it's the greatest single memorial to all that have ever served, friend or foe. Now that sounds a little bit more like something for Memorial Day, but I've included it to remind us that the main reason we have veterans is because we have wars, and the ultimate purpose of those in the service is to fight those wars and take the ultimate risk. And other than benefits, all we can say is thank you. Well, that's about all I can say on the subject of Veterans Day, except for me, serving was the greatest adventure and privilege that I ever have had, that of having served. Thank you.
Hey, Rex, we do have a question. Michael Hartman in the chat wants to know, when did the ROTC program begin?
ROTC is an outgrowth of a program, I believe, that started during World War I, but I'm not absolutely certain as to just exact. Actually, you might say it began back in 1863 with the passage of the Land Grant Act, because under the Land Grant Act, those universities who received their benefits under that act, the creation of land and all that sort of thing, had to provide military training. But the formation of the actual Reserve Officers Training Corps, I'm not sure. Other questions?
Thank you, Rex. And as a reminder to the audience, if you have any questions, feel free to drop them in and I'll pass them along. This is Terry speaking, by the way.
Thank you very much.
We'll give it a moment to see if anything trickles in.
No, doesn't seem to be.
And we've got a hearty thank you for your service, Rex.
My pleasure, mine and a lot of other. When I give this in person, I usually ask the audience, and I've given it in person to some audiences, retirement centers and other places. I ask those who served in each of the branches to stand up so we can recognize them and reward them for their service. Okay, thank you for having me here to talk about service.
Rex, this was great. Thank you so much. I'd like to now introduce our second presenter, TU Archives Associate, Felicity Knox. Please, the floor is yours.
Hi. Sharing my screen now. Okay, so good afternoon. I'm very grateful to be able to share some of the stories regarding veterans and their impact here at Towson University. In my time in the archives, what I've learned is that TU has a proud tradition of dedicated military veterans who have helped create the campus we all know. While I'd love to delve deeply into each veteran's story, I don't have that luxury. So please know that this presentation is a sampling of the impact made by military veterans on our campus. I think that was my phone and I apologize. Towson University was originally founded right in the middle of the Civil War as the Maryland State Normal School. While we concentrated on educating future teachers, our student population was overwhelmingly female. However, Libertas Van Bachlen, who created the part of the Maryland Constitution that actually established MSNS, had previously founded a military academy in Catonsville, and physical education classes like this one pictured often focused on military-style exercises for the few men who did attend. Of course, all that changed during the World Wars. We don't have much information about World War I. The college was still primarily female and had just moved to the Towson campus. There wasn't a student newspaper, and we don't have a lot of records outside of the very administrative ones that talk about how the school functioned. There's no mention of the war outside of some program changes, and definitely no mention of any of those who served, not even those who were drafted. There was a lot of difference during World War II. This photo is of the class of 1943. 2 of their classmates were killed in action, and many of them served in the war effort, as did many members of the school community. Enrollment and staffing dipped incredibly low during the war itself. We have a large collection of photos and letters from these service members, so we have a very robust picture of what the campus looked like at the time. That collection is thanks in large part to the work of this woman. Her name is Rebecca Tansel, and she was the registrar of the State Teachers College at Towson at the time. In that role, she began writing a newsletter to share with not just those on campus, but alumni and those serving across the globe. The newsletter was a lifeline for those in action. She also collected the items we now hold, creating a scrapbook with pages for each service member. As the war raged on, she also enlisted and served as a member of the WAVES, which stands for Women Accepted for Volunteer Emergency Service, which was in the US Navy. She was in charge of 300 women who lived and worked at the Navy Supply Depot in Mechanicsburg, Pennsylvania. She returned to Towson and was named the Director of Admissions at STC, and also began teaching Spanish in the Modern Languages Department. She remained at Towson until its transition to a liberal arts school in 1963. John Gwynn was another staff member who joined the military during this time. He began at STC as a young man, joining his father, Lewis Gwynn, who was the head of the janitorial staff on campus. Right before the war, Gwynn stepped into his father's role after the older Gwynn retired. He was beloved by many staff and students on campus. Before his departure for Nebraska, where he served in a US Navy Officers Club, Gwynn was given a watch by the elementary school students who actually were in class on campus. We had an elementary school on campus. After the war, Gwynn returned to Towson and resumed his work. After 32 years at Towson, rather than retiring, Gwynn was named the head of the duplicating department in 1957. He continued to work in this capacity for another 14 years until 1971. Gwynn was so revered on campus that he actually delivered the keynote address at Dr. Hawkins' retirement dinner in 1969, and Dr. Hawkins was the head of the university at that time. Charles Haslip was one of those alumni that Tansel reached with her newsletters. He graduated in 1938, and I presume that the time he spent between graduation and joining the US Army was spent teaching music. While serving in Italy as a master sergeant in the US Chemical Warfare Service, Haslip worked to gather school children into a choir. He learned Italian actually to overcome the language barrier. Upon his return to the US, he earned a master's in secondary music education and returned as a music faculty member in 1957. By 1968, he was an assistant to the Towson president, and he retained this position until 1985, working for 3 presidents, Hawkins, Fisher, and Smith. After his retirement, he continued to teach and perform with various vocal groups. He died in 2006, but just this past March, he was posthumously named to the Maryland Music Educators Association Hall of Fame. Dallas Smith was another alumni, a few years older than Haslip. His story is pretty extraordinary. I like to tell it a lot because I find it really incredible. He is one of two students that we know of who were imprisoned in POW camps and escaped. In his file, Dallas Smith was included. He included a very matter-of-fact listing of how it all came about. And the part where he's captured, he said, "Much to my amazement, I became a prisoner of the Germans. I have yet to figure out how it happened." And then he goes on to detail in very stark terms, like, and this is when I escaped, and this is, we spent 10 days on the road, and then we crossed over the German line. So he's pretty extraordinary. Upon his return to the States, Smith also returned to STC to get his bachelor's degree. And you can see in this post that he was, it's very, again, this very matter-of-fact prisoner of war. So his graduation in 1931 came with a teaching certificate. So he actually needed to return to STC to get his bachelor's degree in order to teach in Baltimore City, which is what he wanted to do. But as you can see on this page, he's not alone. Jimmy O'Connor was also a veteran who returned to campus after serving in the military. So many military veterans took advantage of GI Bill money to return to school, and STC created a junior college program, and we were ready to welcome them and their GI Bill money. This junior college program allowed them to get essentially associate degrees, but also paved the way for our liberal arts course of study in the 1960s. Veterans returning to campus was the theme of those who served in Korea. Students who found their college careers disrupted by the draft returned after the war ended in 1953. This photo is from the 1955 yearbook and shows a brand new student group, the Veterans Organization, which had 4 goals. It was formed to help veteran students navigate the bureaucracy of the school and the Veterans Administration, to participate in student government initiatives, to promote the college itself, and to, quote, foster the spirit of fellowship and maintain the general welfare of the student veterans. The group only lasted for 5 academic years, but in that time, it coordinated off-campus social events to which the entire student body was invited, such as hot dog roasts at Beaver Dam and dances. The veteran students were a new breed for STC. They were usually older and they lived off campus, which separated them from their younger colleagues. But the veterans evolved from an organization that helped their members negotiate campus to one that worked extending veterans' rights. They helped participate in working to pass a Senate bill sponsored by then Senator John F. Kennedy to increase veterans' benefits. And they helped conduct tours of the campus for like League of Women Voters members. So this balance of supporting each other while serving their community is one that military veterans would follow in succeeding years. For 14 years, veterans were rather quiet on campus, even as the country began sending soldiers to fight the conflict in Vietnam. Much of the student records are caught up with protests against the war and tensions between students and recruitment groups on campus. However, in 1974, 2 things happened. First, a new organization, which was named Towson Concerned Veterans, began on campus to discuss current issues that affected veterans, including benefits and job searches. Secondly, a veteran of the Vietnam War, Art Rogers, was appointed as the first director of the newly formed Veterans Affairs Office. The office itself offered support for veterans, collaborating with campuses across the state. So Rogers was a local kid. He'd gone to City College and gotten his bachelor's from Morgan before being commissioned to the U.S. Army in 1964. And 5 years after he joined, he was hit by a roadside bomb and he lost both his right leg and the use of his left leg. And then he also suffered burns over 50% of his body. So he used a wheelchair for the rest of his life. He joined Towson's the Towson State College campus, not just as a staff member, but as a student. He earned 2 masters from Towson, one in secondary education and another in geography and environmental planning. And he taught geography at Towson for 10 years, even after the Veterans Affairs Office that he worked in was folded into another entity on campus. 40 years later, students once again created a veterans group on campus after veterans from the Middle East conflicts began attending TU, thanks to recruiting efforts like the Operation Service to Scholarship event created by Tracy Miller in 2006. Miller worked at TU since 1978 as both a faculty and staff member, serving in a variety of roles until her recent retirement in 2018, and she remains a significant presence on campus as a member of the Towson University Retired Faculty Association. She has served as president of that body as well. Miller's son, Nick, was killed in action in 2004. And as a Gold Star mother, Miller has worked to make space for veterans at TU, serving as an advisor and on the Veterans Concerns Committee. So one of those veterans, Patrick Young, was featured in this Powerlight article in 2007, describing his service as a sergeant in the U.S. Marines from 2001 until 2005. He graduated from TU in 2010, but he was then named the Director of Veterans Services at TU, and he remained in this position until 2016. In 2014, Young was elected to the Maryland House of Delegates, and he has served as Deputy Majority Whip for the last 3 years. This photo is of Rogers Anderson. He worked in TU's Health Center as a physician's assistant for many years and was well loved by his colleagues and students. Sadly, Mr. Anderson passed away on October 5th at the age of 82. While working with him this semester, Dario learned that he'd also served as a Marine. Mr. Anderson is emblematic of many of the veterans who work and or attend classes on campus. He was a steady presence at the Health Center and was well respected by many in the TU community. We are a better community for having had him as part of our campus for so long, and we are a better community for the many veterans like him who have worked and attended classes here at Towson University, giving back to this institution in countless ways that we have yet to truly measure. Thank you.
Felicity, are you open for questions if anybody has any?
Absolutely. I will stop sharing my screen though. Somehow.
Feel free to drop them in the chat if anybody has them. And I do know that we missed a question. I'm very sorry for that.
Sorry, I'm trying to stop it. There we go.
I'm happy to answer any questions about, as the current director, if anybody has some real-time questions and not archival, I'm happy to be available for that as well.
I figured you were the expert in the room, so I wouldn't want to step on your toes.
What was that? I always say I can't speak for everybody. Right. So I guess the outstanding question then, and thank you, Felicity, that was awesome. The question we missed was, do you feel there's value for all young men and women to do some type of service? You know, I'm hesitant to take the question for Rex, who unfortunately is missing at this point. But I can speak for myself again. You know, for the military, for me, I'm also a local person, went to Perry Hall High School. And the middle school and the elementary school, lived right there on Ebenezer Road and walked all 3. And I graduated high school with a 1.88 GPA, if you can believe it. Didn't really have a lot of motivation, discipline, you know, that's kind of one of the reasons I joined. And, you know, the Marines was very, very tough. I graduated boot camp right before 9/11/2001. So I was already in the Marines when the towers fell. And then subsequently deployed in 2003 and 2004 with the Marines. It was very, very tough. Lots of hard things. But that service imbued me with a lot of intangibles that I've used to do really well in life. You know, internal motivation, a sense of leadership, a sense of camaraderie and higher purpose that I've been able to use to go on and get a bachelor's and a master's. You know, and now I try and take those skills with our community here at Towson University, which I'm happy to report is vibrant and growing. And my job is very easy in a lot of ways. I've been here for a year and a half, and everywhere I go, everybody says, oh, Dario, we'd love to collaborate with you. We'd love to support the student veterans. So I just ask our students what they need, and I try and make that happen. And I'm just kind of the bridge builder and respect to give that to them. So for me, I think there's value in service. I don't think it has to be military. It'd be great if people if we incentivize Peace Corps more, or maybe even working in national parks or other public projects like City Year or AmeriCorps. That's just my opinion. I don't know if any other vets would like to speak on the subject. I see some more questions coming in. We have 212 student veterans that our office supports. Those are vets who qualify for VA benefits. We support an additional 2530. The bursar's office does. Those are people on active duty using a special tuition assistance benefit. And unfortunately, there's probably 15 or 20 students we just can't track very well. Either they got out under other than honorable conditions and didn't qualify for the GI Bill, or maybe they were medically retired and don't get VA benefits, or maybe they're just an older student coming back to retrain in a brand new skill and don't have any benefits left. So I want to take a minute in my role to also share some other great things we're doing. Tomorrow, we're doing a veterans comedy show with an Armed Services Arts Partnership. They're very well known for a comedy boot camp that they do in the area, which I actually am an alum of, and it was a ton of fun and a great challenge, as hard as anything I've ever done, to go up on stage and do stand-up comedy just once. I'll probably never do it again. But we have some of their comedians who are all veterans. Some of them will be talking about their service and, you know, looking at the comedic aspects of that, and also talking about you know, other elements of that. We have a Veterans Day trivia that we're also doing later that evening at 7 p.m. And we'll be doing our foundation partners and advancement partners have been nice enough to help highlight a program that we have within the TU Foundation that directly supports our efforts. You know, we were able to use that money to create special emergency grants for student veterans during COVID. You know, we want to keep that going. We want to be able to provide other special grants. Rex kind of hinted at this at his presentation. You know, the original GI Bill covered for everything. And while the current post 9/11 GI Bill is very generous, it doesn't meet the need for everybody, and they still need more help. You know, so we want to be able to provide that if necessary. And just give our student veterans the best, the absolute best, because I really think that's what they deserve, and that's what we want to provide for them. One of our priorities is to create world-class institutions and events, and that's what I'm trying to do here at the Military and Veterans Center. Alexa dropped in some of the links in the chat. I dropped them in as well. That's where you can follow with more of that. I'm going to drop in my email as well. As my boss always says, you know, I'm Dario DiBattista. I'm a real person. If you reach out to me, send me an email, ask me a question, you will get a response. So I'd love to hear from everybody. I'm super thankful for all your feedback and attendance today. Thank you, Felicity. Thank you, Rex. This has been awesome. Absolutely awesome. So I guess that's it. Have a great day, everybody.